good morning, everyone. I have four things for you today, but they may not sound like they relate, but we'll do our best to bring them all together. So these four things: a big funeral, American isolationism, my zucchini plants, and God's pruning. Yesterday, the day before rather, on Friday, I was at the funeral of a father of one of our young priests. Father Declan is a good friend of mine, comes from a very strong Catholic family, and he recently lost his father in a sudden tragedy. So on Friday, the church was full of about 500 or 600 people to support Father Declan, his mother, and his 7 brothers and sisters as they laid their father to rest. To make it even more meaningful, the bishop was present, and the number of priests there totaled about 40. You will never see that many priests all together unless you're at an ordination of new priests. What that showed to me is the support that is inherent in this brotherhood of the priesthood. None of us is a loner when it comes to being a priest. We're all part of something much larger, and when something happens, we're there to support one another. I don't know what it's like to have to bury a parent. Hopefully that doesn't have to happen anytime soon for me. But I have buried a couple of my grandparents in the last few years. In those difficult times, I received lots of support from my priest friends. But of course, I don't just get support from them during difficult times, because I have priest friends and support groups that I see on a regular basis. So it's a normal thing that we support one another throughout our ministry, through thick and thin, on a daily basis. Like me, many of you probably have your own support systems. You have your families, your friends, your colleagues, your teammates. These are all small communities who lift you up, come to the rescue in the bad times, but then also serve to strengthen you in the good times. And so today, when Jesus says in the gospel, "Be firmly connected to him, the vine," I'm reminded that I not only have to be connected to the vine, I have to have a connection to the other branches around me who receive the same nutrients and the same vitality of life that comes from that vine, Jesus Christ. You and I are all those branches. Unfortunately, in our American culture, not everybody can say that they feel a part of something much larger, where they feel that they're supported. That, in part, is caused by our American isolationism. Here in the U.S., 1 in 4 American adults is estranged from at least one family member and has cut off all connections with them. Maybe some of you fit into that category. Among young men in the U.S., ages 25 to 34, which is my age group, a growing isolation has contributed to a recent spike in liver disease as a result of excessive alcohol use. And for our young people who are most connected of any generation because of their phones and social media, they're often called the most disconnected and the loneliest generation. Some social scientists say that for the first time in human history, we, meaning Americans, no longer look outside of ourselves for meaning, for our identity, and our place in life. We used to, for those of you who grew up in older generations, you used to look to your communities, your families, and your churches to figure out what you were supposed to do with your life, where you were supposed to go, and what your life meant. We were connected to the other branches on the vine, so to speak. But now in 21st century America, we no longer look outside, we're encouraged to look inside. Now no one else can tell you who you are or define you, because our culture has freed you from those restraints and tells you that you should be free to define who you are and not listen to what anybody else says. That's the air that our children breathe. That's what our children are growing up in today. Just imagine, though, if you are burdened with such significant decisions as trying to figure out what your destiny in life, where you're supposed to go, and your direction. Imagine trying to make that decision all by yourself, in isolation from everybody else. That makes a young person rather lonely. Scientists say that loneliness is correlated to low self-esteem, difficulty in maintaining relationships with others, poor problem-solving skills, and an unstable self-concept. Is it any wonder, then, why there's so much confusion and anguish and mental disorders that our youth suffer from? Because of the isolation that they're encouraged to embrace by our culture. You can't be connected to the vine, Christ, and at the same time be disconnected from the other branches. It doesn't work that way in the plant world, and it certainly can't work that way in the human world. Even though we're attached to the vine, we're affected by the other branches, the other people around us, and we also have an effect on them. To give you a visual of this, over the next couple of weeks, I plan to start my small garden out here outside the rectory. Now, I'm going to put a few seedlings in the ground, hope everything goes well this summer. One of the things that has produced the best yield for me in the past had been my zucchini plants. But there's been a problem. As well as those have produced enough zucchini, they don't produce as much as I'd like. The problem is that I have a small garden, and for those of you who grow zucchini, you know what they produce? Humongous leaves that cover everything else, all the other plants. So you end up getting a good bumper crop early on in the season, but then you don't get much throughout the summer. At least I don't. You know why? Because I don't prune the leaves as much as I should. And when you don't prune the leaves, then there's no room for airflow to come through. The bees can't get in to pollinate. And you get that white powdery mildew on your leaves. Anybody else get that? That's because of an excess of moisture and not enough air coming through. All because I've left so many leaves on my zucchini plants that they cover everything else. You have to prune them. You have to cut the leaves because pruning promotes new growth. That's why Jesus says that every branch, meaning you and me, that produces fruit, then gets pruned by the vine grower, our Heavenly Father, so that it can produce more fruit. If I don't get pruned, if I don't cut away those things that are not good for me, then what you're left with is a limited production of fruit, like the zucchini plant, overgrown leaves that prevent airflow, and you get covered in stale mildew. The same as with our spiritual life. So in our relationship with God, if we don't allow the Lord to cut away those unnecessary things that prevent us from doing God's work, we go off and do our own thing. We're separate from everybody else. I create my own reality. I try to define who I am. Then you just get overgrown. You get covered in a stale mildew, and the worst part is you don't produce the fruit that God has intended you to produce. This is how God's pruning works. Anybody here never had any difficulties that have come up in their life? Never had any issues or losses or sacrifices you've had to make? Well, of course, that applies to nobody here. That's God's pruning. What the Lord does is He allows you and me to go through sacrifices. We have to give up our time. We have to give up our treasures, our money. We have to give up our convenience. Parents, spouses, you know this. You have to give it up all the time. And when you embrace that, God uses that to prune you, because now you're thinking less of yourself, and the big branches that you would stick out cover everybody else and prevent their growth. Now God prunes those so that the bad parts get cut away, and then you can now produce fruit. Producing fruit means thinking less of yourself and more about others. I know that I've shared with you some negative statistics and things that haven't been great trends in our culture, but I want to share with you some positive signs that I've experienced recently. This past week, I got to be invited to give a talk to the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, FCA, from LaPorte High School. About 30 or 40 high school students who come together on a regular basis and sing praise and worship. They hear some talk, and they just support one another in the faith. Very empowering for a few of our students, but lots of other students. To be able to see that they see themselves as firmly connected to that vine and also connected to the other branches. They are actively saying no to their culture of isolationism, which tells them you create your own self and your reality, cut off from everyone else. And they say, no, I want to be connected to the vine, Jesus, and connected to the other branches so we can support one another. Another positive sign is as vocation director, I've gotten to visit quite a few of our seminaries within the last few months. Whenever I go back to the seminary, I'm reminded how much pruning had to take place in my life when I was there. I went in with a lot of rough edges. A lot of those branches where it was focused on me and not on others. What happens when we're with a couple hundred other young peers, young men, who are dealing with the same things you are? Well, they make fun of you, they give you a hard time. Your formators tell you, you need to fix this, you need to clean up that act. And little by little, with your prayer life with God, you start to have those branches, that overgrown self-interest and pride, cut away, so now you can focus on others. Friends, the great assurance of this parable of the vine and the branches is that you and I are firmly rooted, connected to the vine. We're not self-isolated, we're not self-dependent, and we're not left to our own devices. But in order for us to stay rooted, in order to continue receiving nutrients from that vine, be connected to the source of life and not shrivel up like a branch that's cast away, it requires that you and I follow that three-word commandment: remain in me. Jesus says in the gospel today, remain. 8 times he uses that word. You know it's important. When we remain in the Lord and we remain in one another, then nothing is able to overcome us. So the experience on Friday of being at this funeral and being with all these other priests, it taught me that in this supportive environment, if I'm going to produce fruit and have a good effect on others around me, if my life is going to reflect the goodness of God, then I have to treasure this brotherhood of the priesthood, the branches that I share this ministry with. I have to remain close to all of you as fellow branches on the vine, brothers and sisters in Christ. And I myself have to remain firmly attached to the vine, which is the source of life, and Christ himself. So friends, today let's heed that simple commandment that the Lord has given to us: remain in me.